Hello, everyone. Ted Lacksonen, the country thinker here, bringing you the next episode of The Eagle Has Crashed. Now, this is going up on Easter Sunday, and I'm hoping that you're spending time with your family and friends instead of with me. But regardless, moving on to the story, you may notice that the title of this particular episode is a little bit different from previous episodes in that it's not the month and year. This episode is called Eaglenomics, which is a TV-like talk show inspired by one of my favorite shows, The Kudlow Report. Now, I'm not going to say that Larry Kudlow approves of this book or any of this. I'm just telling you where the inspiration came from. And as I go through and read this particular chapter, I'm going to have to mention the name of the individual speaker since I'm not going to attempt to do 3 or 4 or 5 different voices. Now, there are 4 of these Eaglenomics chapters spread throughout The Eagle Has Crashed, and in them I go through some of the underlying economics that went into this book. Since I did an enormous amount of research before writing the book, I thought it'd be good or beneficial to share with readers who are interested in some of the economic issues behind The Eagle Has Crashed to give you the benefit of reviewing them, as well as for people who are very well versed in economics to see what some of my underlying premises are. Now, some of you may wonder how a person with education in law, design, and history, where I have the audacity, if you will, to make big economic statements. Well, I've studied economics extensively for a long period of time, but to give people comfort that what I'm saying is in the realm of reasonable, I had these Eaglenomics chapters reviewed by Associate Professor of Economics Jay Corrigan at Kenyon College. So he took a look and said, yeah, what you've said here, you're not really operating outside of the mainstream. You're presenting some fairly standard propositions here, so the reader can rest assured that I'm not out in some crazy land when I make some of the assertions here. But to quote one of my favorite movies, Spinal Tap, enough of my yakking, let's boogie. Jasper. Welcome to Eaglenomics, everyone, on the America Now Network, the place where you go when you need to know. My name is Calvin Jasper, and the topic for this segment is, what could we have done to avoid this mess? To debate this question, I have convened a distinguished panel of experts. Former economic advisor to President Sherry McDowell, Dudley Hoss Watson, is here on the set with me. Also joining us tonight is Princeton Public Policy Professor Kurt Peterson, beaming in from New Jersey. Finally, we have Professor Murray Stevens from Music University piping in from Michigan's Upper Peninsula. You heard the question, gentlemen, but let me make sure we're in agreement on one thing. The problem we're facing is a debt problem, a national debt problem, and it is wrecking our economy. Watson, yep. Peterson, wrecking is an overstatement, Cal, but it is having some adverse effects. Stevens, you're right on the mark. Jasper, this is as close as I've ever gotten agreement from all 3 of you before, so I'm pretty darn pleased. Let me start with you, Hoss. What could we have done to avoid this national debt problem? Watson, the problem is a spending problem, especially entitlement spending. I mean, seriously, we've known about the fiscal challenges presented by the baby boom generation for 70 or 80 years. We knew they were going to get old and retire, and that generations X, Y, and the millennials weren't big enough to support them. That wasn't a surprise. But we kept promising more and more and more to Americans. Sure, we've cut some entitlement benefits, but we still couldn't make it work. The bottom line is that the United States made promises to Americans it could not keep in light of the aging demographics from the baby boom retirement. Peterson, no, the bottom line is that America is a wealthy, prosperous nation, and we have demanded basic services to take the rougher edges off of our capitalist system. We needed higher revenues to support these services through an aging demographic, both through higher taxes and streamlining the tax code so there were fewer loopholes for revenue to escape. That's what we should have done. We needed higher revenues, period. I've been extremely consistent over the years in that argument. Watson, and if higher tax rates squashed economic growth, then the revenues wouldn't have materialized and we'd still be in the same boat. There are mountains of empirical evidence that demonstrate that higher tax rates slow an economy. And as you know, we did increase taxes quite a bit over the last 20 years, but a smaller workforce just couldn't totally erase the problem of the baby boomer retirement. Over the last 20 years, revenues have consistently remained higher as a percentage of GDP than any previous period, but did not increase as much as tax rates due to fewer people paying them. That problem was worsened by a steady stream of people leaving the U.S. for countries with lower tax rates. If they were higher, the exodus would have been greater. We could not have taxed our way out of the problem. Peterson. I'm going to have to disagree with you on that point, Haas. We could have raised taxes high enough to balance a budget without wrecking the economy. And the exodus, as you call it, was statistically unimportant. Jasper. Let me interrupt for a second. For me, the bottom line is that it was a dangerous, high-stakes gamble to elevate federal spending so high that it became unclear whether any reasonable combination of spending cuts, tax increases, and economic growth could fix our fiscal mess. And the really bad part is that the next 20 years will be even worse. Peterson. We're talking about basic services that Americans wanted, and it was the job of economists and budget gurus to figure out how to make it work. But congressional Republicans haven't been willing to make the necessary sacrifices to raise the revenues to support an economically and fiscally sound nation with basic safety nets. Stevens. Let me chime in. As you know, I'm going to disagree with you, Kurt. Let me say that we should have run massive surpluses from 1980 to 2010 and invested in real assets, such as foreign debt, like most soundly run countries do, or we could have paid down our debt. In other words, the baby boomers should have paid for themselves, and we would have had assets to call on right now to pay for things like Social Security, or at least had access to affordable credit. We didn't do that, and there was pretty much lights out USA. But getting back to the main point I want to discuss, when you look at our states as sub-economies, states with low taxes and fewer benefits have prospered and avoided the fiscal problems faced by states with plentiful benefits. People have moved in droves from New York, Massachusetts, California, and other entitlement states to places like Texas and Utah. If population shifts are a barometer of people's beliefs, obviously a great many Americans, if not the majority, disagree with Kurt's view that they want government to provide basic services if it means higher taxes. Although I agree with Haas that spending cuts were necessary, I have a different view as to how that could have been accomplished. The only way that the United States could have survived the baby boom retirement, given that we didn't accrue surpluses from 1980 to 2010, was to enforce strict federalist principles and limit federal action to its enumerated powers. The individual states could have decided what services, if any, to provide. The bankruptcy of individual states causes far less collateral damage than the whole U.S. blowing up, as we saw when California and several other states defaulted on their debts a few years back. Additionally, states are more nimble at making necessary budgetary adjustments, which they have done a much better job of since California demonstrated what a mess defaults creates. And of course, there is the benefit that states can structure themselves differently, so Americans can find a home somewhere that reflects their personal morality when it comes to the duties of government. I'm going to make this perfectly clear. Federalist principles are an economic necessity for a country our size, and had they been adhered to, we wouldn't be in this mess. So in an offhand way, the Supreme Court is responsible for our predicament by signing off on federal expansion at virtually every opportunity. Jasper. This is the first time I've heard anyone blame the Supreme Court for our fiscal problems. Stevens. Everything is connected, Cal. Perhaps if the Supreme Court had declared that citizens had a constitutional right to a balanced federal budget, things would have worked out differently. Jasper laughs. Peterson. This talk of federalism is crazy and out of touch with reality. You need to get out of the Upper Peninsula more often, Murray. Stevens laughs. Peterson. It's precisely because states and individuals would have tried to wiggle out of their responsibilities that it was completely appropriate for the federal government to take the lead role in providing basic services for all Americans. The gradual expansion of the federal government was built upon reasoned constitutional jurisprudence that slowly evolved over a century and a half. It's called progress by most people. You would have taken us backward by more than a century, Murray. That's not progress. Jasper. I'm going to have to wrap this up. One last question, and I need quick answers. Who is to blame for the mess we're in? Watson. Democrats for opposing greater spending cuts. Peterson. Republicans for opposing higher taxes. Stevens. The Supreme Court for giving children guns and gasoline. Jasper, those are some interesting perspectives, gentlemen. Thank you as always. Coming up after the break, we're going to talk with Senator Dan Bell of Nebraska to see what Congress is doing to clean up what seems like a very, very big mess. So, okay, I hope you enjoyed the first Eaglenomics section of The Eagle Has Crashed. And if you didn't find it that interesting, if you get to future ones, you can just go ahead and skip them without missing any of the storyline from The Eagle Has Crashed. Again, these are just information only to help share with people some of the background information that I learned regarding the federal budget, economics, and some other basic issues. And as always, I want to remind you that if you're enjoying this, the author would greatly appreciate if you purchased a copy. And the book is available in ebook and or paper version through my publishing site, Clear Peak Press, or through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, the iTunes Store, the Sony Store, Smashwords, and other retailers. So again, I hope you're enjoying the show, and let's have a good week, all of us, this week. And let's get back together next weekend and rejoin the story of The Eagle Has Crashed. Bye now.